Hey guys, Hamster here, the TechRodent, and I'm back with another review, this time taking a look at the Samsung Galaxy Note 4. In a world where smartphones are getting cheaper, with some even going below the $300 mark for flagship specs, is there really a place left for a device that costs about $800? It's an interesting question, so let's find out. The model that I have with me today is the SM-N910C, which is the Southeast Asian variant of the Galaxy Note 4. Because of that, in place of the Snapdragon 805, it uses the Exynos 5433 that has actually been renamed to the Exynos 7410. The Samsung homebrew processor packs 4 Cortex-A57 cores at 1.9 GHz and 4 Cortex-A53 cores at 1.3 GHz. These are running in a big dot little with GTS configuration, meaning that they can run as a true octa-core processor and is of 64-bit architecture as well, though in the Note 4 they run in 32-bit. For the GPU, there is a 6-core Mali T760 and you've got 3GB of RAM for your multitasking needs. Storage-wise, there is 32GB of internal memory, and if that wasn't enough, you can expand it with a microSD slot as well. Finally, keeping the phone alive is a 3220 mAh battery that is removable and replaceable. With that out of the way, let's see what you get when you pop open the box for the first time. In terms of packaging, there's really nothing too different from the way Samsung does it. First up, the Galaxy Note 4 that's securely in place. Moving under, the quick start guide. The wall charger that has adaptive fast charging and so is rated at both 5V at 2A and 9V at 1.67A. The metal tool for removing the nib of the S Pen together with some replacement nibs. The micro USB cable that comes in white. And finally the in-ear earphones with replacement earbuds for different sizes. Picking up the phone, you're greeted with the 5.7-inch Super AMOLED display that has a spectacular 2560 by 1440 resolution that has brilliant colors, deep blacks, and near perfect viewing angles and great sharpness due to the high pixel density. Below that, as per Samsung usual, you'll find the hardware home button with capacitive keys on both sides, though the options key on the left has now been replaced in favor of the task switcher key with the back button on the right. The hardware home button hides the fingerprint sensor as well, though to use it you have to swipe your finger down as opposed to holding it on, which I much prefer. Shifting to the top, you get the notification light, the earpiece for hearing all that jibber jabber, the phone sensors, and finally the 3.7MP f1.9 front-facing camera. Over to the right, the power button that's similarly made out of metal like the rest of the body, that has a nice chamfered edge on it, doesn't wobble around, and has a equally nice tactile click to it. The volume rocker can be found on the left of the phone conversely, which has similar characteristics to the power button, except that the ends pop out a bit more. Moving over to the top, the 3.5mm headphone jack, a pinhole for the noise cancelling microphone, and the IR blaster. Rolling over to the bottom, the micro USB port that's no longer USB 3.0 like the Note 3, another pinhole for a noise cancelling microphone, and the S Pen. In terms of physical looks and design, the S Pen hasn't really changed much, though it does seem longer than the one found on the Note 3. In usage though, the S Pen got a sensitivity boost that makes handwriting feel a lot more natural on screen. Finally, shifting focus to the back of the phone, the rear cover has a nice soft rubber leather-like finish that gives the phone a premium look without the false stitching that was found on the Note 3. Also on the back, you'll find the 16MP Sony-made Exmor RS IMX240 camera with an f2.2 aperture, the flash module and the heart rate sensor below that, and finally on the bottom left corner, the speaker grille with a slight notch to keep it elevated. Popping off the back cover is as easy as finding the notch on the top left edge and pulling on it. Underneath, you'll find the microSD slot, the micro SIM slot, and the 3220 mAh battery. To say that I'm very happy with the Note 4 would be an understatement. Samsung has moved away from their older plastic bodies with glossy finishes in favor of something that looks absolutely stunning and premium and feels the part in your hands as well. The phone fits really nicely into your hands, and unlike any of the other previous iterations, Samsung has finally gone with a beautifully machined metal body and improved on the overall design compared to the Note 3. Given that they're putting TouchWiz on a heavy diet as well, I feel that Samsung has finally started to move in a good direction, listening to their consumer base. Before we move on to the internals, I'd like to talk as well about something that has been circling the net, in particular Gapgate. The news spread that some people were able to fit an entire business card in between the gap of the body and the screen, and obviously many prospective buyers were concerned by this. Now I'm not sure if it just affects the Snapdragon units, but for the unit that I got, I found it difficult to even fit an A4 sheet of paper, let alone a business card. That's not saying that it's impossible, however, as admittedly if you try hard enough, you will find a corner where it'll go in, though for the most part I consider Gapgate to be a non-issue. Powering the phone on didn't take long at all, taking only 17 seconds to fully hit the lock screen. Swiping anywhere across the screen unlocks the phone, while swiping the camera icon quickly unlocks to the camera. And of course, the phone runs on Samsung's own take on Android, the infamous TouchWiz. Also as expected, the default launcher is the TouchWiz launcher, and it looks like nothing has really changed here. Clearly, as a flagship device, this phone doesn't hold back on performance, as getting around the Note 4 was quick and snappy, though I did occasionally notice that it could take quite long to launch the task switcher. Flipping into the settings page shows that the phone is based off Android 4.4.4 KitKat, with the Lollipop ROM already making its way out in some regions. Swiping through the device, the one thing that I did notice that was different from previous Galaxy devices was the amount of pre-installed applications, or rather the lack of it. Clearly, Samsung has been listening to the complaints of the amount of unnecessary applications, and they have been toned down significantly, though there are still some present that I am willing to overlook. Of course, to no surprise, the Note 4 scored the highest I've ever gotten in the Antutu benchmark with 50,093 and scored 20,070 in Ice Storm Unlimited, maxing out the other two tests. Running Epic Citadel benchmarks, the Note 4 scored 58.3 FPS in high quality and 46.7 FPS under ultra high quality, both of which were running at the phone's native resolution of 2560 by 1440. Finishing up the array of benchmarks with GFX Bench, in T-Rex the phone scored 1402 and to no surprise, a higher score of 2100 in T-Rex off-screen. Whether it was warranted or not, when I first laid hands on the phone, my immediate concern was to whether the Mali T760 could keep up with the 2K display. It's clear to see now though that it can do more than just keep up with the resolution. In fact, rather excels at it, meaning that you shouldn't have any slowdowns or hiccups whatsoever when gaming or using any 3D intensive applications. The camera on the Note 4 has definitely changed as well, and not only in terms of optics, but in terms of UI. Gone are the gaudy metallic looking buttons with a layout that makes finding the options that you want to use and access difficult. The UI now looks very similar to that found on the S5, except that it's gotten a lot lighter and trimmed down compared to its smaller brother. Options like HDR are quickly accessible from the main UI, with slightly less common controls nested deeper within the options menu. Photos are taken instantly, optical image stabilization helped a lot, and the HDR mode actually does what HDR is meant to do. Vastly improved dynamic range of the photos without making them overly saturated, overly exposed, or some mishmash variation of the two. I love it as well how, just like the S5, there's a live preview for the HDR mode, and possibly the only other thing that I find myself just a little bit disappointed with is the lack of full manual controls for the camera. I'm definitely excited though to see if the Android development community will bring the much improved camera functionality on the S6 onto the Note 4. Photo taking was honestly nothing short of a pleasure on this phone, as it was downright capable of taking some of the most amazing shots I've ever seen on a smartphone, rivaling that of low-tier DSLRs. Photos are pleasingly sharp, HDR works great, noise levels are really kept to a minimum, colors are lovely and vibrant, and color balancing got it right most times. Bokeh created by the lens Aperture is smooth and pleasing to look at as well, and is abundant, especially in macro photos. Which brings me to one of my complaints, the amount of processing on the images, as honestly while they do look nice, they just come up as a little bit over-processed and denoised for my liking. Moving into low light photography, exposure was great and colors still remained good, though noise levels started to creep in a little bit more. Enabling HDR while still a bit dark and noisy helped to evenly expose the photo, and though flash did help to expose my subject very nicely, the background was left underexposed. The magic, however, happens when you enable both HDR and flash at the same time, where both subject and background were very well lit, details were crisp, noise was reduced, and colors were warmer as well, more towards my liking. There's no specific mode on the Note 4 for night or twilight photography, but that didn't quite stop it either from achieving some pretty decent results. Even while it's not as good as phones capable of manual adjustments, for what it's worth, even despite the slightly higher noise levels and much more aggressive processing, colors still remained quite vibrant, details looked a bit soft but were still very good, and the amount of exposure attained was very satisfactory. In a nutshell, the combination of the Sony sensor and Samsung's optics definitely do not disappoint. With all that said above, it's then no surprise that the video recording on the Note 4 was a pleasure. 4K recordings were nice and sharp with great colors, but I think that 1080p with HDR or video stabilization enabled was a lot more useful. It should be noted though that HDR, video stabilization and some other functions are only available outside of 4K recording, and even then, only one of them can be enabled at any given time. Aside from that, the audio capture from the video recordings was top-notch, but perhaps this is what we've come to expect from a top-tier device. What's up guys, this is a 1080p video recording with HDR enabled on the Galaxy Note 4. Running my battery life benchmarks, I got 31 hours and 36 minutes of light usage, courtesy of a combination of great on-screen time and idle times. For the numbers on the non-stop video playback test and the standby test, check out the full review. So we finally reached end of this video, and now it's perhaps time to sum up the Note 4. Coming from a Note 3, I really like what Samsung has done for the Note 4 in terms of design aesthetics. Not only does it look beautiful, but it feels solid and sturdy in my hands, a welcome change from its predecessors. TouchWiz is getting better, and that's a good thing, but it's still TouchWiz. So while the phone has ample amount of performance to throw at you, I can't help but feel that a lot of this potential still remains untapped, and that all it needs is a good custom ROM to set things right, or perhaps even diet TouchWiz from the S6. The camera performs wonderfully and is probably the best camera that I've used that just works out of the box. The display is wonderful, the speakers sound great, with me working up to probably the only problem with this phone: the price. If you have deep enough pockets, it's not much of an issue, but it's still a lot of money to throw around, and really not a number that anyone can just throw around. Still, you do get what you pay for, and you would be paying for one hell of a phone with a lot of good to say about, with the only real bad points to creep up if you were to really nitpick about it. It's because of this that I can give the Note 4 a 9 out of 10 with ease. For further details on things like the audio output quality, battery life numbers, and more thoughts on the phone, do check out my full review by clicking on the links around the video and in the description. As always, if you like this review, want to see more or find it helpful, give it a like, and if you have comments or questions about it, feel free to voice out in the comments section. Thanks again for watching guys, and till next time.